We are talking about the sorcerer and the sorcerer's apprentice. And I think the way that it's been used politically, the way mystical ideas and technology, as I term it, has been used by governments, has been in the way of a sorcerer's apprentice, like in the famous Walt Disney film Fantasia, where you have the sorcerer's apprentice having access to the power and the power getting hopelessly out of control right away,
Hmm.
because there was no spiritual framework for it. There was no spiritual goal. The goal of spiritual integration was not there, and the necessary practices, the purification of the individuals, the preparation of the individual consciousness was not present. In terms of the CIA, as an example, they specifically wanted to find out, how do we erase memory? How do we create a new memory? How do we program someone to commit murder? How do we use hypnosis to do that? How do we use hallucinogenic drugs to do this? I mean, all of these practices were used on unsuspecting individuals with no spiritual preparation or training, no context spiritually in which to put this, and they were experimented upon and then thrown out onto the street. And that in a microcosm, I think, is what governments do on a macrocosm.
Hmm.
They try to control the masses. They try to erase our memories. They want us to forget about things that have happened, that we lived through. Forget about that. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you this new reality. This is the reality. We're all going to be part of this reality now. The other reality doesn't exist anymore. Forget all about it. So on a massive scale, they're doing what CIA was doing on a miniaturized scale with individual people and individual groups, minority groups, of people they were trying to influence just to practice on as human laboratories to see how this would work.
Hmm.
I believe that all of this is part of what was originally called mysticism, perhaps, magic, certainly. The actual gears, the machinery of religion, the machinery that gives us religion,
Hmm.
was also giving us all of this.
Right. So this would relate to the fear, the paranoia that you spoke about in the beginning, which is that these groups are not able to connect to the unconscious realms, let's say, or the imaginal realms, the spiritual realms, whatever we want to call them. They're not able to fully understand those realms. And so they're busy trying to reach an understanding of them so that they can control them, and in the meantime they would be terrified, as you say, of any individuals who actually can access those realms, as they would be the ultimate threat, if you will, to the system of control which they've created as a sort of like a flimsy surface on top of this seething ocean or swamp of the unconscious. So any individuals who are actually able to access these realms would be a potential threat to their hegemony, let's say. And so a way for them to, I was just thinking of MK Ultra and all this, you're talking about them taking individuals and actually using technology as a way to access those realms of the psyche that are the source of that energy, of that power, in the hope of harnessing and channeling that power to their own ends. And then the result of it is that they create, let's say, this programmed killer who is unconscious of their actual function. So they're actually creating a cutoff in an individual so that they exist at a conscious level, they exist on the surface as this ordinary citizen, and their unconscious, let's say, has been hijacked, has been co-opted by the controllers, or whatever we want to call them, as a means to direct it towards their own ends. And
Certainly.
yeah, this isn't really leading up to a question, is it? I'm just trying to work out these ideas as I'm speaking, because it seems you're talking about things as they're literal historical agendas, perhaps, but they're also metaphoric, wouldn't you say, for a larger process that's occurring in the species?
I believe so. I think that it is a metaphor, and I think that's why I called my trilogy Sinister Forces. It's a kind of a metaphor that politicians have used that particular phrase to demonize the other,
Hmm.
or to refer to things that were operating beyond their control, or odd things that were taking place that they didn't want to explain, or they could not explain, or they refused to explain, were blamed on sinister forces.
Right.
It's a quotation from Watergate, actually. That's where I got it from initially. It was the explanation for the missing 18 and a half minutes on the Nixon Oval Office tapes. It was blamed on quote unquote sinister forces.
Hmm.
So I love that concept. Is here was the government saying, "Wow, there are sinister forces, and they're doing odd things to electronics." But what you said, to go back, hijacking the unconscious of an individual, yes, and hijacking our unconscious in a sense as a race, as the human race, is part of this process. And if you are religious, and if you are whatever kind of religion, you generally believe in the existence of a soul, something that is a spiritual part of oneself,
Mm-hmm.
however you want to describe it, a spirit, a soul, a sheath, an astral sheath, or there's all different ways of looking at what this is. What happens to a person under a program like this where your unconscious is hijacked, as you say, and your unconscious is now carrying out orders for a government agenda, committing murder or mayhem of some kind? What is the condition of that human soul, of that individual human soul at that point that has been so contaminated, manipulated, has been touched by unclean hands, you might say? What does that mean? And why did nobody care about that?
Hmm.
Why was it so easy for the government to just walk willy-nilly through people's unconscious minds, playing with what they found there? The experiments in Canada, under Dr. Ewan Cameron, as an example, called psychic driving and depatterning and all these other processes that took place, where memory was wiped out and new memories were created and placed as a form of quote unquote therapy.
Hmm.
What is that? I mean, is our soul the sum total of our memories? Of our emotional reactions, of genuine responses to the environment? If so, then these poor people in Canada had their souls taken from them essentially.
Hmm. So perhaps it's to do with these individuals driving these agendas, that if they've cut off themselves from their environment, inner and outer, they don't have access to their own unconscious. So that would mean that they would need to use other people's unconscious to find what it is they feel they need, on the one hand, and on the other hand it would mean they would have no conscience, because they're not being tormented by their unconscious awareness that what they're doing is wrong.
Well, there is the case of Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the man at CIA who was responsible for a large part of MK Ultra. Once that program was terminated, he became a Buddhist.
Yeah.
He went to India, he converted to Buddhism, he converted his house to a kind of ashram, and refused to talk about MK Ultra to the rest of his days.
Mm.
I see that as a kind of guilt reaction, of
Mm-hmm.
course, but he would never admit that he was guilty, that what he had done under that program was evil in any way. But through his actions, he became a selfless kind of Buddhist monk.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, so what I find interesting in this study is that these are things that anyone can research, anyone can look up. I mean, this is all in the documentation that's available to everyone. The story is there. You have to look a little deeper sometimes. You have to pull at some threads, but when you do, you find this remarkable story of human consciousness and the manipulation of human consciousness that's gone on for centuries. In our own country, gone on at least since the Cold War. I mean, it's the most well-documented aspect, has been since 1950.
Well, this is fascinating, and I've got many questions. I'd like to go deeper into this, but I'm thinking let's just press on with the questions and just see where it leads us.
Very well.
So the next question was, and it's of course related, how much would you say that sorcery stroke magic is a determining factor in politics, media and world events? And how central a factor do you consider blood sacrifice to be in this?
Well, sorcery and magic in general, as Reich pointed out and Adorno pointed out, of course, it was central to the Third Reich, which was probably the most traumatic experience of the 20th century. I mean, the Great War was traumatic, the First World War, but I think the Holocaust, the Third Reich, World War II, was really an outgrowth of what happened in World War One. And I think that demonstrates right there the extent to which sorcery and magic were important. I mean, the Nazis were devil-ridden people. I mean, they were heavily involved in occult research. Rudolf Hess was very involved in mysticism, magic, astrology. Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, was. He created an entire branch of the SS called the Ahnenerbe, which was tasked with occult research. So, I mean, it was definitely part of it. I mean, the symbol of the Third Reich was the swastika. I mean, we're talking about a cult, basically. To
Hmm.
me, the Nazi Party was a cult. It was not a regular political party the way we understand it. These were not, Republicans or Democrats or, Tories or conservatives or liberals or Whigs, or these were people who centered their ideology around an individual person, in
Hmm.
this case Hitler, and an ideology that was consonant with him, and nothing else was allowed. And there was no extraneous influences allowed in this. This was a cult,
Hmm.
and I think they were the most obvious manifestation. But during the war, we developed in the United States the idea of psychological warfare, which was a refinement of this concept of using um, mystical ideas or occult ideas in a more proactive way. The Germans had a word for psychological warfare. They called it Weltanschauungskrieg, which means worldview warfare.
Hmm.
So you're having a war between two points of view, two views of the world, which means basically two forms of reality, two visions of reality.
Hmm.
And I think to me, magic is the manipulation of reality, the manipulation of the experience of reality.
Hmm.
And what we did on our side was the counterpoint to what Goebbels was doing on the Nazi side, which was to create images, to create ideas, to create very powerful concepts as as weapons. We militarized language. We militarized art. We militarized music to a certain extent. These were all used as weapons to provide a different worldview and to convince the other side they were going to lose the war and to convince them that our way was better.
Right.
Not by the time of the 1950s, we had somebody like Andrija Puharich, who was a captain in the U.S. Army, who was giving speeches to the Defense Department on how to militarize the paranormal, how to militarize extrasensory perception. It was seen as a valuable weapon, especially after the brainwashing episodes of Korea, of the Korean War in the early 1950, 51, 52. There was this concept in among the intelligence communities of the world that somehow the communists had found a way to manipulate consciousness.
Hmm.
Of course, we were trying to do it at the same time during World War II, but here were the communists, quote unquote, doing it to individual soldiers they had captured and converting them into loyal communists and sending them back to the United States. So this was opened the eyes of so many intel people that said, wow, I mean, we can actually manipulate consciousness to this extent. And the Russians are doing this, and the Chinese are doing this, and the Koreans are doing this. We have to do it ourselves.